With you, everyone. Is the screen showing well, John?
Yep.
Okay, hi, I'm Mariette. I'm from Kenora, Ontario. I grew up in southern Saskatchewan, which is 2 provinces over. I have been doing catechesis, like John said, for seems like forever. I've always had a passion and an interest in figuring out how to best engage learners. And I think when it comes to engaging learners, I think we have such a phenomenal platform because we're going for faith. We're going for love of God, the love of God that we have, that we want others to have as well and to experience. So it's really exciting to think about what we would call pedagogy or the design of learning. And I forget, like John was saying, we've known each other for a long time. So I've been in the catechetical field now for 40 years. And I forget how much wisdom and experience we glean from that. Yet when I came to approaching this topic, I was like, really, what have I got to say about this? So here's my stance. My stance is I'm going to offer you what works really well for me, what I appreciate, what I've learned from others, and hopefully it will affirm what you're doing. Hopefully it might challenge you a little bit to take some risks, but overall, I hope that we together can look at the possibilities that we have for catechesis. Okay, the slide is not going down, John. The slides, of course, were advancing perfectly before I started. And now they are not advancing. Any tips, anybody? I don't want to have to. So let's start with a verse from today's psalm. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song, for the Lord has done marvelous things. The Lord's right hand and holy arm have won the Lord victory. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm doing faith formation, I feel like it is kind of a victory. It is kind of a struggle, and I want to win. I want to win with God on my side. So we are doing marvelous things because the Lord is working through us. So I love the psalm for today. So the heart of this, what we're trying to do is we really have to understand what our role is as catechists, as faith formators. Are we in the act of transmitting information? Are we really just about let's get the catechism and let's get it in them? Or are we about engagement? And wherever we land on that line, because it's a huge spectrum. Sometimes, like in this moment, I'm transmitting a lot of information. Hopefully in other moments, we'll be engaging with one another as we do the learning. So it's not really an either or, it's a both and, but it does fundamentally guide our pedagogical choices. We can't just fill up a water glass and say, well, we've got this 100% Catholic child before us now, or this 100% Catholic adult. We really have to learn how to balance the two, and engagement is absolutely critical. So I want to offer you my 2 stances on when I'm looking at catechesis and faith formation. What are the windows? What are the high values that are guiding my choices? And second off, I'm going to move through a bunch of different strategies and ideas that I use. So hopefully, like I said, we'll all end up with the more practical ideas and resources to continue on our journey as catechists. So I really come from the stance of trusting in the learner. That's hard sometimes because sometimes we look at the children or the youth or the adults that we're engaging with and we're like, do they really have the capacity to learn this? Do they really? And fundamentally, we have to understand and accept that they do, that they're created in the image and likeness of God. And I really believe that God created us all able to learn and to engage. And that's critical for us to understand and accept. So if we really trust in the learner, what we design will reflect that. Here's an example. So my daughter is 25 and she teaches kindergarten. And one day she sent the kids out a couple weeks ago into the forest after the snow left and asked them the question, what is the most important thing in the forest? Now you're thinking, well, was she doing a science lesson? What was she doing? She wasn't doing anything to arrive anywhere beyond asking what's most important, because she trusted that her learners would be able to identify what that was. So the conversations as she documented the thinking of these 4 and 5-year-olds was quite incredible. They ended up with this question. So the kids all named all the different things that they thought were important in the forest. One child had named, I think this is important because it's beautiful. Another child had said, I think this is important because it's a tree and it gives us oxygen. So they had named this whole diverse collection of things. And then they had a whole group conversation and they talked about this. Would God create anything that was not important? Do you have to do something to be worth something, or is just the virtue of being created enough? And I thought, wow, she is trusting in the power of the learner to engage in the faith conversations that they need to have. Now, as we look at it from a catechetical perspective, we probably would have gone to the creed. I believe in God, the creator. I believe in on all of that. All she had to do was ask the question, what do you think is important in the forest? Can you imagine if we took a group of teens into a church and said, look around, what do you think is important here? And then had conversations about it. That is empowering and entrusting that the learner is a capable learner. If you come from a second stance, which is a favorite of mine, if you come from the stance of awe and wonder, everything that we do is from that sense of, wow. And as we age, sometimes we lose that sense of wow, but we know that in the second half of life, people that nurture that sense of awe and wonder all the way through their life actually live healthy and rich spiritual lives, because everywhere that they turn, they start in remembering and naming the presence of God in all things. So what if we listen to the gospel stories like they're the first time we ever heard it, or start wondering about details in them that we often take for granted? What if we marvel at the learning girls and the goals and the catechesis that we're entitled to do? What if we marvel instead of something to be taught, but as something to be celebrated? So are we facilitating from a place of wonder or from a place of, I know this, I got this, moving from all knowing to all curious? So in the chat box, just take a second and write this. When you think of your own teaching, what's a central stance for you? What's the non-negotiable as you think of where your teaching comes from, where your faith formation comes from? What for you would say, this is a non-negotiable. This is one of my stances that's important to me. So engagement, if we look through all the different ways that engagement can take place, I think engagement looks like ritual. We're Catholics. We do the sacraments. We have oils and candles, and we're constantly in ritual. From the moment we make the sign of the cross to whatever we do, we're constantly using ritual. And learning catechesis looks like ritual. So ritual's learning. In the doing, in the naming is the learning. So for example, I often go into one of the classrooms at St. John Paul II school and teach them about St. John Paul II. And at the end of that teaching, every year, and they ask me for it, they want Pope hats, because they want Pope hats to wear just like St. John Paul II does. So we make the Pope hats, and then they come up before me one at a time, and I take the Pope hat, just this paper, simple Pope hat, and I put it on their head, and I say, are you willing to lead the sheep like St. John Paul II did? And these students look at you and they shake their head and they say, yes, Mrs. Martineau, yes, we are. And then one year, one student left this learning, this ritual, and went to get a clipboard. And the teachers and I are looking at him wondering, well, what are you doing with the clipboard? And he said, well, I need to write down the names of my sheep. If I have to take care of them, I need to write down all of their names. And I thought, wow, that was learning through the ritual of just getting a Pope hat placed upon your head. A couple of weeks ago, we lost a grade 6 student in a car accident. And you talk about hard times, navigating with the grade 6 class and the educators and the educational assistants that all worked with this student. And it's fascinating and heartwarming to see the natural rituals that these grade 6 students were able to create around their understanding of death. So for example, one student came in last week and he put a worn Winnipeg Jets jersey, because that was the team that Evan used to cheer for, takes the worn Winnipeg Jet jersey and places it upon the desk. And the teacher started to make a connection to the palls we use at funerals and how we cover things with the baptismal garment of the pall, and how the hockey jersey has a connection to that covering and that holiness of the life that Evan lived. So ritual, I think, is a really powerful thing that we need to continue to do. Things like butterflies. I have a picture of a butterfly here. Last spring, a young class was releasing the butterflies that they had grown, and they started to have a conversation about if God was to bless these butterflies, and so they move through the whole concept of grace and blessing. But if God was to bless these butterflies, what would we want God to bless them with? So they wrote down everything they wanted the butterflies to be blessed with. And then they went outside and they released the butterflies and they prayed the prayer together about what they wanted God to bless these butterflies with. So the engagement about ritual and grace and blessing and trying to send butterflies on their way. So engagement looks like ritual. Engagement, I use a lot of images. So to me, engagement looks like connecting to the power of an image. Yesterday, one of the presenters said that images stay, images walk with you. Like they're different than words. Like I'll forget a phrase or I'll forget a word, but very seldom will I forget an image. Images are much harder to erase off of one's heart than words are. One of the places that I've gone, and I've got decks and decks of pictures, and I'm going to explain in a few seconds how I use the pictures, but I've gotten decks and decks from Vibrant Faith, and maybe John can comment that on the end, but they're beautiful images from people to nature to items, very rich images. So if you're wondering as I move through this, well, where in the heck am I going to find all these images? I think we can point you to a place that will have them for you. One of the ways that I use images is comparing and contrasting. This is connected to the learning that we do around St. John Paul II. So what I'll do is I'll show them a book of a shepherd, pictures of a shepherd, and we'll talk about all the different things that a shepherd does. And I'll show them an image of a snake and a sheep, and I'll show them an image of the sheep drinking water and eating food, and I'll show them an image of the shepherd gathering them and herding them together. And if you've ever taught kindergarten before, you know that's your everyday, all-day experience, herding the children. So there's this. So I use the image of the shepherd, and then I post beside it an image of the Pope. Because usually this is in conjunction to St. John Paul II. And we'll look at the image of the Pope, and we'll look at some of the clothing that the Pope wears. We'll look at the staff that the Pope carries, and we'll say, well, what's the difference between a Pope and a shepherd? And what's the same between a Pope and a shepherd? And immediately the light bulbs are going on, and they're making, just with the use of two images. And they're going to remember these images much more than they will if I had told them what a shepherd does or told them what a Pope does. So in a compare and contrast scenario, if I was working with grade 6 and higher, I would probably invite them to find an image of what does human dignity feel or look like when it's respected. So they would find an image and they would do that. And then to contrast that, they would find another image of what does it look like when it's not respected? Put them side by side and what's the difference? And then have a conversation around why is human dignity the central teaching of who we are in our Catholic social teachings and basically in who we are as human beings. So that's one way to use images. Another way to use images is very simple. Compare and contrast again with there's 5,000 people and there's 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. Which number is greater? And how is this all going to happen? So instead of just telling the miracle of the story of the loaves and the fishes, really putting the math there so that they can see the contrast between the two. I like to use images at the end of a learning so I invite the students to find an image that captures their learning of today, or that captures their experience of today, or that maybe captures a question that they didn't get answered in the learning today, or something that they want to explore further to find out. I like to use images as, again, in closing, in a silent circle of gratitude. I invite the students, whatever we've been talking about, to find an image about that, whether it be about scripture stories we've explored that day, whether it be about Laudate Si and the creation stories, whether it be about songs we've learned, whether it be about the sacraments that we've explored. I like to invite them to just take one picture, and then we sit in a circle and they quietly and gently place the picture down. We just go one at a time. They show the picture and they put it down. And then we close simply by saying, thank you, God, for the gifts of today. We don't talk about it. We don't discuss it. We just end by putting down our gratitude. The bugaboo that I have, and I'm going to share it with you because, you know, when you're the presenter, you get to take certain liberties, right? And when John Roberto trusts you to take the certain liberties, you take the certain liberties. Over my lifetime, I have probably created thousands and thousands of worksheets. And I've started to realize, and, you know, it might be a slow awakening for me, maybe others of you have discovered this already, that engagement embraces the power of a piece of paper that happens to be blank. So instead of me continually saying, fill in this blank, it's more like, I want you to record what's most important for you from this learning right now. I want you to record the wondering that you have about this. And it doesn't have to be on a piece of paper with lines. And if it's on a piece of paper with lines, they don't have to write in the lines. Because do you ever start to wonder sometimes, why are straight lines so important? I know when I take notes, my notes are disastrous because they're all circular, because that's how my brain works. And I have a friend that takes them very linearly. But what about the population that they don't operate well on straight lines and need to record their thinking or draw it? Part of a I Think movement out of the Rotman School of Management in University of Toronto in Ontario, they're really starting to encourage people to use a visual alphabet. So not just the A, B, C, D alphabet, but a visual alphabet, teaching people these very basic symbols so that they can draw out what they're thinking or wondering. I thought, wow, you know, there's something that happens in our brains when we go to images and symbols versus continually just using words. And you know, when you think of the technology that we have, obviously this could be bumped up to different levels, but just a blank piece of paper and inviting people to record their learning that way. It's hard for us to let go sometimes of worksheets and straight lines, but there is a place for blank pieces of paper. And I would suggest that they should be more popular than the worksheets and the line sheets. Another way I think of engaging learners, and I was listening to Sharon and Charlene's presentation yesterday on inclusivity. And I think about this one a lot because I think sometimes the practices that are really geared or best for a few are actually the practices that are geared best for all of us. And 2 years ago, I wrote a book, Faith on Wonder, Faith in Science, because I'd written a kindergarten book around inquiry, and the publishing company said, we really want you to write something else. And this has been on my mind. As part of my mission as a religious educator in a Catholic system, religion shouldn't just be confined to the religion class, right? And the same thing, so religion, why can't religion have science in it? Science is in, faith should be part of science, so why shouldn't science be part of faith? And you look at what Jesus used as he taught and explained things to people. So often the gospel stories are connected to real, concrete, tangible realities in our world. And those concrete, tangible realities all have properties. So instead of just talking about the oil as a sacramental oil and where it comes from, like Sharon was saying yesterday, people need to touch the oil. They need to do things with the oil. What happens when you put oil on water? What happens when you put oil on your skin? What are the properties of oil? Why did we anoint people with oil? You think of the stories of Jesus with water, you know, putting water, taking dry dirt and pouring water on it and watching how it transforms the dirt. Properties of water, properties of rocks. You know, in our grade 4 science here in Ontario, rocks are part of the science curriculum. But rocks are such a foundational image. And maybe it's because I live on the Canadian Shield, so there are literally rocks, and I'm talking rocks as big as houses everywhere. But rocks have such amazing properties to unpack the gospel stories that are connected to them. And this all comes back down to our senses. So in connection back to this grade 6 student that we lost and the whole grieving process, the image that's coming up for the grief counselor as she moves with this class is the image of a rock. The image of how grief is really rough and hard around the edges. But as you navigate and move your way through it, it polishes the rock. And then connecting that back to the Psalms that talk about rocks and faith and not being a burden, but you know, being part of our journey. And then I'm a prairie girl, so you have to throw on the grains of wheat. You can't just talk about the grains of wheat and Jesus walking through the field and pulling the grains apart and then getting in trouble with the Pharisees for doing that. You have to experience the grains. You have to see how beautiful they are. You have to see how connected they are. You have to see what happens when you pull them apart. You have to see how the shells have to be removed in order for the seeds to fully grow. So engagement is connected to exploring the properties of the science in Jesus's teaching. So take a second in the chat box and just wrote down what's a favorite gospel story of yours that contains matter, that could be explored more deeply with the students that you're encountering, be they teens or adults or children. Just note that in the chat box. What's a favorite gospel story for you that has matter in it? That could be taken and explored differently. Next, collection of engagement, and this has to do with scripture. And I don't think this will be brand new for any of you, but I'm encountering as I move through and support educators in our own system, I'm encountering a lack of comfort with scripture. And hopefully that's unique to our own area, but it's like people haven't processed it or feel uncomfortable yet in making it their own. I know the difference it makes when I go into classrooms and tell the story like I know the story, because I do know the story, and so do you. You know the story. So telling it from your heart, from firsthand experience, the learners will be with you in a way that they're not usually with you when you just read it from the gospel. And changing the volume. I've noticed how easy it is when I change my volume and I go lower, and then when I go to a medium volume and I go to a louder volume, how that also engages the students differently when I'm telling the story. It's almost like by the volume I use in my voice that I'm highlighting different aspects of the passage. Second reality of telling scripture, and this really is again, it's common sense, but I don't see it practiced as much, is tell the story from a contemporary lens. Bring the story to right here, right now. I was walking down the street and I encountered a student from St. John Paul II student, and he was hurt. And I had to make a choice. Do I stop and help him or not? I was a teacher and I was in a hurry, so I kept on going. And so on. So you tell the story with a contemporary lens. Third, and I love doing this with the grade 3 class that I visit a lot, because they're so animated and engaged, wanting to be engaged with the story, is wherever I can, I integrate a community response, even as something as simple as the people said, wow. And I just stop and say, and the people said, and they say, wow. And it engages them in the reading, and it activates their listening skills so that they're paying attention for their cue as well. I use sound effects. Particularly, I like to go, I have a grade 2 room that I go into, and they're the dramatic grade 2 students. And so whenever they can create sound effects, whether it be the wind on the water, whether it be the splashing of the waves, whether it be the sound of Zacchaeus climbing that tree, whatever the sound is, they love to incorporate it. And last wondering I have about engaging students with scripture is read the story without words. If you can find picture books or images online, read the story with just the images and don't use the text. And then get the students to fill in the text. So go through it once with just the images and then go through it again with the students, and they're adding and building out on the text. I was listening to Paul, who did the presentation on technology and hybrid learning before I came on this afternoon. And one of the most critical skills I think we can use for engagement is giving our students and learners, be they adults, teens, or younger children, the skill of asking questions. It's not like yes, no questions. There's a power in a question that enables people to think critically. So the Right Question Institute, which is connected to Harvard University, has a whole process that you can connect to and unpack, because I can't unpack it here this afternoon. But basically, there's a co-generating of questions, be it co-generating questions about a sacrament, co-generating questions about a gospel reading, co-generating questions about scripture, about morality. They're co-generating the questions. And then the students and that with the facilitator, the learning facilitator, move through the questions, either tuning the questions or removing the questions, because the questions aren't the right ones to enable them to get to the depth of learning that they want to have. So it's a great resource. And I found when I was a grade 6 teacher that this was an art that the students, how do I politely say this, had squished out of them. It was almost like they had been trained to just receive information instead of critically processing it. So it took us a couple months in the grade 6 room to really work with the students to help them to see again that their thinking mattered, that their curiosity mattered, that their wonderings mattered. So engagement means creating a space for students to ask questions, but not just questions, but the really good questions. So in the PowerPoint and in the handout that I prepared that John will post on Monday, there's the link to the Right Question Institute out of Harvard. One of the final comments I'd like to make is that engagement means pre-imagining learner response. Now, I'm not sure if you know what I mean by that, but when I took my adult learning certificate many moons ago, I always was annoyed because part of the adult learning process was imagining what the adult learner might say. And I always struggled with that. But then I started to realize that if I never imagine where the learner is going to go, and I'm not going to hit all the places, and this is not about assumptions, but if I never imagine where the learner might go in their responses, then I'm not ready for the next provocation or skills or information that they might need. For example, like in a kindergarten room where provocations and inquiry are the heart of what they do. The educators really struggled to imagine the learner response. But I went back to my daughter and I said, well, why did you ask that question about what's important in the forest? And she said, well, I didn't want to tell them what was important. And we've been talking about God and creation and life. And she said, I wanted them to name. And then I said to her, well, did you pre-imagine? Did you think about what they would say? And she said, oh yeah, we thought for sure they would say trees because there's oxygen in the trees. And we've talked a lot about that. And certainly that's what they said. They talked a lot about rocks. Well, we imagined what they would say about rocks because that was one of their topics. But she said, what we never imagined was the one gal saying beauty, that this item, this plant in the forest is there because of beauty. So because we had pre-imagined all these other learner responses, we had space to ponder with her what it meant to be beautiful. So I really encourage you to not just create the lessons, to not just think of the engagement strategies, but to also invest in pre-imagining learner response, because that will also help you. And I know I've been there too. I've thrown out engagement things and thought, oops, how did I get there? Because I never pre-thought what all of the potential responses might be. And it also helps to broaden my imagination. When I start thinking, especially when I can imagine the learners that I'm going to be engaging with, when I start imagining what they might be thinking or come forward with, it helps me to ensure that the activity or the engagement strategy that I've used is actually a fit for them. So, and lastly is that children's literature. I know I'm a teacher, late in life, got my Bachelor of Education and got totally more broadly exposed to the field of children's literature. Children's literature is bursting at the seams right now with awesome stories and illustrations. And there is so much within it, whether it be with adults or teens or kids, little kids. Literature has so much to teach us because it takes a story and puts it, it's like watching a movie and you get transported to a new world that you didn't know you were going to get to before. So engaging with children's literature, and if you're like, well, I don't know where to start with children's literature, I don't know what to find. 2 years ago, a colleague and I rewrote an equity curriculum for Kenora Catholic based on read alouds. So it contains, let's say, 8 grades worth of children's literature. So that's, say, 32 books to start with that can come complete with the lesson plans, the questioning, and it's equity connected. So you're always going to find the connection to church social justice teaching within it. I included that within the handout that I shared with John as well. So Kenora Catholic is offering you our equity curriculum to start with for children's literature. And bottom line, I don't remember a lot of the general catechetical directory. I haven't read the new one in full from front cover to back cover. There's always this phrase that has stuck with me from the last edition of the GCD, and that's what we're about in catechesis and faith formation, religious education, however you define it. We're about intimate communion and relationship with Jesus Christ. And it's our job, it's our mission, it's our vocation to find pathways to engage the heart and to engage the head and to engage the hands. We know that by heart. So let's take some of our energy, whether it's launched from a program that we're required to teach, whether it's launched with the catechism itself, let's really look at that and say at the end of every lesson, have we helped our learners and ourselves to deepen that intimate communion and relationship with Jesus Christ? And this is, the feelings, you end a learning time and there's a tangible energy in the room. The questions might still be floating about, but your heart feels full because it's in synergy with the full heart of the learners. And I think that's what we're about. Do we succeed all the time? Absolutely not. If we did, we wouldn't be learners. We wouldn't be lifelong learners. So on that note, I will turn it back to Mr. Roberto. I'll stop sharing the screen, John.
Great. Thank you, Mariette. That was wonderful. I've got a couple of questions, and I'll ask people to please in the chat add some questions. So I have a technical one.
Okay.
One question is, what is QFT stand for?
QST is the question formulation technique.
There we go.
That is from the Right Question Institute connected to Harvard.
So, and we'll put the link in there so you can get to the right.
Yeah, that's why it's the link is in there. The link is in there for them.
Great. What have you noticed that's changed in learners over the last decade and a half? I think in particular children and teenagers.
Okay, because I would say right across the board, the ability to stay focused for any length of time, if it's not active and hands-on, is very, very difficult. I do a spiritual formation program for the adults in our board, and I've had to change my entire style of how I do it. And even though I thought I was being engaging, it wasn't engaging enough. I know when I go into classrooms that the teachers are like, well, they don't listen, they don't participate, they don't want to learn about God. But if I go in with a provocation or a question or an item, they're going to engage. So I really think the attention spans are shrunk. And I think COVID had part of that, but not all of it, because I think it was coming. Because we're in an instant, from the technology session, people press a button and it's there. So I think we really have to be selective in the strategies and tools we use as we do catechesis, because the attention span and the ability, and I work in a publicly funded Catholic school system. So the learners that I see have very limited frame of reference of Catholic practice. So I can't go in and talk about the sacrament of baptism. I have to go in and we have to talk about water and light and then shift to baptism, because they have no concept. Many of them have no concept of what we're talking about. So it's that entry points I think have changed. Experience entry points have changed.
So a question that popped up is, how do you address behavior issues, disruptive behavior during your engagement lesson?
I think that if there's still disruptive and behavior issues, that you haven't hit the right engagement. That's my bias, because I've seen it. Like, I've gotten warnings as I've gone into a class and they're like, oh, they'll never listen to you because they're so disruptive. And I'm like, well, just let me try. And I'm also go in with a sense of humor. Like, I go in with, I don't expect you all to 100% focus in. I expect a little bit about that, but I kind of make a little bit light of it. But I really think it comes back to, I'm really all about change the teacher, and no offense to whoever asked the question, but I'm really about, if it doesn't work, I need to change me. because the learners are the way they are. And I haven't found the right way or style to engage. And again, I know I've seen behaviors, lots of different behaviors, from the table throwing to the whatever. I've seen all of that in the context of one classroom. But I really think it's about teach your heart. And really, I know this sounds simplistic. It's not really my mission. It's God's mission. So I need to do what I can to prepare myself and turn it over.
You spent a lot of time working with professional educators, teachers.
Yeah.
And you worked a lot with parish catechists.
Yeah.
What are the implications of this, of the kind of the flow of learning that you presented for the way we form teachers, educate teachers, and form catechists?
We need to form through this lens. We knew, I was just, interesting enough, I was having a conversation with my colleague, my early years colleague, who thinks I'm a pretty good facilitator, and which I kind of smile at and say, I don't know if I am. And she's like, like, we're doing a book club. We're doing a book club that we want it to be engaging. And she said, but we don't want to deal with the content of the book because it's so dry. And I think, well, yeah, because you have to start with engagement. You have to go at it from an engagement lens. So you don't go in and say, okay, what did you think about the book? You go in and find the image that describes for you how you felt affirmed because you read this section of the book. So I really think the formation practices, and I'm in the middle of that right now as I deal with the formation program in my own board. I've really had to shift. I thought I was engaging. I thought even following the engage, explore, reflect, apply, the typical model of religious education, but I've had to put a lot more work into engagement and reflection in order to get to a little bit of exploration and application. So it's like the weight of the lessons have changed.
Because of the background people bring, or
because of the background they don't have, like, just because we're professional educators, they may know how to teach math, but they don't know how to teach religion. And they're also coming from a place like volunteer catechists. I hope it's nobody from my board. I'm just kidding. Volunteer catechists have a different heart and a different passion sometimes than a paid educator might. Because a paid educator is required to teach 7 or 8 subjects over a day. Religion is just one that we throw in, that we do because it's part of who we are. But I think a volunteer catechist has more desire, passion in order to explore how to best teach. And they're there because of that sense of calling, which I hope my colleagues are there because of calling, but we get paid well in a Catholic school system. So sometimes we're there for jobs, not for mission. And that's like in any position, Catholic profession.
So we'll take catechists and a parish catechist. If you were doing some workshops for them to introduce them to this whole approach to learning, what would you incorporate?
I would incorporate, I would start with hands-on, tangible. I would say, we're going to talk about baptism. And I'm not even sure I would say we're going to talk about baptism. We're going to talk about water. We're going to explore all the properties of water. What do we know about water? What do we hold true about water? What are the scientific principles of water? And then we would move to the symbols of water in baptism. I would be showing them how to do it and experiencing it with them versus saying, well, this is how you teach. For example, if this workshop wasn't online and we had 3 months of preparation time and the ability to ship supplies to every person, that's how it would have looked.
Yeah.
It would have been an immersion in it, because you can't, it's like quilting. You can't quilt unless you quilt. Unless you actually, like, I could watch every video on quilting and I could be shown, well, here's the process. But unless there's a quilter with me and we're quilting together, I don't know how to quilt. I don't learn how. And there's so many different learning styles, but I don't learn how. And the same thing, I think, with catechesis, parish catechesis, volunteer catechists who may not have a lot of time to prepare things. It's finding the nugget in the potential lesson that's saying, okay, the kids would engage with this from a hands-on perspective. And I think I could go through almost any program. And if people want to email and you say, I'm trying to do this, I'd gladly tell you this is how I do it. But I think in every program it's there. I know in the program we're required to teach, they're there. You just have to figure it out and pull it out differently, because it might not have the same emphasis it would as to the reading the article or the, but you can't, the article isn't going to make any sense without understanding the value of the learning in the first place. Pardon me, I think the chair's squeaking.
One comment says, I'm not an educator by trade, and finding an engagement is difficult for me because I have not been formally trained. I spent the first year trying to cover the curriculum the parish chose, and I could see the eyes glazing over.
It's true. And the thing is, it's heart to heart. And I know I'm a pretty high feeler, but it's heart to heart. You want the students to want to learn about God. And sometimes the programs just do it in a manner that's not comfortable to the educator. The pedagogical approach isn't my pedagogical approach, my way of teaching it.
So part of the advice is look within that lesson and find the engagement piece, or find what brings awe, find what you can celebrate, find what you can pray around, and then make that your starting point. And
make that the starting point. Because even though the lessons are, from I can't even remember, I'm having a bad memory day. That we know that religious educators have defined certain ways of learning, right? We know that there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whether it be minds on, explore, whatever it is. But sometimes in the lessons, because it's print, you need to go deeper and find it. And they're not going to tell you about the gospel story to tell it in your, because they just want you to read the gospel story, because they're happy. We're happy if we can get some catechists to do even that. But you're hearing it. You've heard the gospel stories for years. Just pick one and try it.
So across the year, you can vary your method, you can vary your approaches, try different things, and keep the kids or students, young people, middle school, high school, guessing about what he's going to try next.
Yeah, there's nothing more fun than putting an artifact in front of a group of students. And trust me, church artifacts right now are pretty unknown to them. You could put the altar bells in the middle and they'd be like, what are these? You could put so many artifacts in front of them and they would be like, wow, what is this? What do we do with it? Before you go to the high point of the Eucharist. I don't know which parishes still use bells. I just happen to be in a parish that does. But the high point. So then why would the bells? Why would we want to bring attention to this? So it's finding the artifacts, I think.
As we're wrapping up, 2 or 3 takeaways, things that, you've been doing this for a while. What are some of the things that you really want us to take away and say, as you move ahead, even though this year is winding down, you're looking at the next year, what are 2 or 3 things people should be really focused on to engage learners?
For me, I think it's been a reminder to listen to the learners. Listen to the learners, because often we have the prescribed method of way we're going to do it. But if we just listen to them, we would actually hear hints in what they're processing or what their week has been like that we could launch from. We don't have to be expert theologians. We just have to be people of faith to listen to the learners. The second thing for me is humor. I was one of those teachers that I was going to get control of this classroom. I was going to make them do what I wanted, when I wanted, and how I wanted. It was a miserable year when I tried to do that. And so being able to step back and laugh with them about my own foibles makes a huge difference. I think the level of vulnerability that I now have when I go into a classroom, it's pretty high, but it's also very safe because the kids know I'm going to make mistakes and they're okay with it because they make mistakes all the time. And the third, the image that comes to mind is Peter stepping out of the boat, right, to walk towards Jesus, and then he sinks because he lost his confidence halfway. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't tried. Like just a little bit of trying, we might sink a couple times, but really in the scope of lifelong learning, what really big difference does it make if 1 or 2 of our lessons are a little bit offbeat, or even 10 of our lessons are offbeat? Because we're in a community of learners. Everybody's supposed to be learning lifelong and is engaged and invited to learn lifelong. So really, the grade 2 catechism program hasn't covered everything it was supposed to cover. Have they learned about God? Have they engaged in faith? Have they prayed and ritualized things? Hallelujah. we've won.
It's finding the heart in the year. You like
Yeah.
in Paris, you can't teach it all, no matter how hard you work.
No matter how
Find the
hard you
heart,
try.
find the
You
heart
gotta,
in there,
yeah.
and engaging them sets them on a path to next year.
Yeah, you've gotta celebrate that, because it's like I can get discouraged about my own mission as a religious educator in a small board, but it's not just my job. It's the whole community's job to form the faith. So I'm one aspect, and I'm going to do it the best I can, while laughing at myself, taking risks, and being vulnerable.
Mariette, thank you on behalf of all of us who have been listening and watching you, and from NCCL. This brings to a great close 2 days of online conferences. Thanks to everybody who participated, stayed with us for the whole day yesterday and today. We're really, really grateful for all of you. So blessings on all of you. Have a wonderful weekend. And next Monday, on Monday, I'll send an email out and you'll get the notification about how to access the videos from both days, as well as the presentation pieces. So thank you, and for being part of NCCL and for part of this experience. Bye.
Just wanted to say great job. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for saying that.